What's up everybody? I'm here to bring you the second installment of the arrow testing series that I've been working on. If you haven't caught the last video, please go ahead and go to our page and check it out. I will have it somewhere up here also. I don't know what side it is, but it'll be up there. If you haven't watched that one yet, click on that and watch that one first, and then come back and watch this one, please. So all of this testing started by me collecting the velocity data over a range of arrows for my bow. I'm going to go ahead and throw that graph up here. Now this graph I talked about quite a bit in the last video, and the way I got this was I used gold tip fact weights. I started with a 350 grain arrow and I just added weight until I got up to 980 grains. And then with these arrows I shot them over a chronograph and collected the velocities and graphed the velocities versus the arrow weight. Once I collected the velocities over this array of arrow weight ranges, I was able to put all of that information into Archer's Advantage and collect the downrange statistics. All of that Archer's Advantage data leads us to this video right here. This video I'm going to talk about velocity, momentum, and time of flight. I'm leaving out kinetic energy because if you watched the last video, you can all see my beliefs on kinetic energy. The first thing I want to talk about is FOC and its effects on velocity. In order to do this test, I took a 463 grain arrow that was 17.2% FOC. I took two gold tip fact weights that were 20 grains apiece. And with these two gold tip fact weights, I was able to get this arrow up to 503 grains. I ran 3 different tests. I put one in the front, one in the back, tested the velocity. I put both in front, tested the velocity, and then I put both in the back and tested the velocity. And this is what I found. All 3 of these arrows, no matter where the weight was at in the arrow, shot 281 feet per second out of my bow. So if you remember in the last video, I talked about weight being weight with respect to velocity. This is how I came to that conclusion. Now, I'm not saying that this is going to be the same when it comes to penetration. I do think that where the weight is located on your arrow does affect penetration. I think there's some different calculations there that have to do with angular momentum. But with respect to velocity, I think everything is equal based on this graph. With that information, I kept moving forward with these tests. The next thing I did was take my whole range of arrow weights, 350 up to 980, and plug the muzzle velocities into Archer's Advantage to get all of the downrange statistics. Now this chart shows the terminal speed by yard for each of these arrows. As you can see, each one of these lines is linearly decreasing. Now that is a result of a bow shooting subsonic. Now something that is interesting about this chart is that if you look at the 350 grain arrow versus the 980 grain arrow, you can see that the 350 is losing speed significantly faster than the 980. Now this is a result of a heavier arrow being affected less by the environment. To try to break it down a little bit better, I made this chart right here. This chart breaks the range of 350 to 980 down into 2 sections. And we're going to look at those 2 sections at 0, 20, and 60 yards. So as you can see on this chart, from 350 to 980, at 0 yards, there is a 125 foot per second difference. At 20 yards, there is a 117 foot per second difference. And at 60 yards, there is a 101 foot per second difference. Now that is the 980 grain arrow flying slower than the 350 grain arrow. But when you break this down into sections, you can see that most of that arrow velocity loss comes in the 350 to 600 grain range versus the 600 to 980 grain range. And as a result of that, you can calculate the momentum by yard, which is shown in this graph right here. Now this graph shows that 350 grain arrow has significantly less momentum than a 980 grain arrow. And this chart breaks it down a little bit better. This is the same arrow weight ranges that you saw for velocity at the same yardages, and this shows that a 980 grain arrow at 0 yards has 0.376 slug feet per second more momentum than a 350 grain arrow. 20 has 0.381, and 60 yards with a 980 grain arrow has 0.390 more slug feet per second of momentum. Now this chart also shows that from a 350 to 598 grain arrow at 20 yards, the 598 grain arrow has 0.180 slug feet per second more momentum than the 350 grain arrow. And also at 20 yards, a 980 grain arrow has 0.201 more slug feet per second than a 598 grain arrow. The reason I think there's more of a discrepancy between 598 and 980 versus 350 and 598 is the fact that the window is just a little bit larger. And once again, the difference between these two, I feel like hasn't really been quantified. I don't know how much more penetration you're getting with that momentum difference. Something else interesting you can get from the Archer's Advantage data is this chart right here. Now this chart shows the total time of flight out to 150 yards for this range of arrow weights. And to break it down a little bit better, I made this table. Now, if you want to digest this table a little bit better, I encourage you to press pause and look at it a little bit closer. This table breaks time of flight for each of these arrows down into 0, 20, 40, 60, 80, 100, and 150 yard ranges. What you can see on this table is that a 350 grain arrow gets to 80 yards about a half a second faster than a 980 grain arrow. But how does that half a second relate to the real world? Well, I'm glad you asked. I'm going to take this information and I'm going to relate it to an estimate of the number of inches a deer would drop. So in order to do this, I got on the Google and did a little bit of research. I found an article from Chuck Adams Archery that said a deer's reaction time is 0.1 seconds. And I also found a movement speed of 100 inches per second in this article. Then I went over to the engineering toolbox and I found the speed of sound average from -40 degrees Fahrenheit up to 100 degrees Fahrenheit. With this information, I then assumed that the deer is actually hearing the bow fire, which is semi-controversial because I think there's a lot of people who believe that the deer is hearing the arrow, and I don't know. I don't have an opinion either way. I chose the bow firing because it was an easy point of reference. Now you could break this down by when the deer hears the arrow, but you never actually know when the deer hears the arrow and at what yardage. I also assumed that the deer is only moving vertically, so the deer is only dropping. Using the yards and the speed of sound, I calculated the time that it took for the sound to reach the deer. Then using this time and a deer's reaction time, I was able to calculate how long it takes the deer to react at different yardages. Then I used the time of flight data, the time for a deer to react, and the movement speed to calculate the total inches of drop, which as a result gave me this chart. And as you can see, this chart looks very similar to our total time of flight chart, and that's due to the fact that our velocity is linearly decreasing, our time of flight is linearly increasing, and for each of these arrow weights, you're using the exact same velocities and time of flight. Now this chart can be broken down into this table. This table shows, similar to all the other tables, 0 to 60 yards, and it breaks down the 350 grain arrow to 980 grain arrow into two sections. But if you look at 60 yards, the 350 grain arrow versus the 980 grain arrow, with respect to the total number of inches of deer drop, is 32.5 inches. Now, with the average size of a white-tailed deer's body being from 14 to 18 inches, you're almost 2 body widths of reaction. And from 350 to 600 grains, you're almost 14 inches of difference. 598 to 980, you're almost 18 inches of difference. At 20 yards over the whole range of arrows, you can expect a deer to almost drop 11 inches. Roughly 5 of those inches coming from the first 350 to 600 grain window, and the rest of that coming from the 600 to 980 grain window. With all of this data, you can see that there's still no perfect combination of arrow. An arrow weight combination with your bow is very, very much up to you as a hunter. You need to decide if you're going for lots of momentum, if you're going for lots of speed, or if you want somewhere in the middle. Me personally, I'm shooting a 467 grain arrow, which is giving me these statistics based off of my calculations. And I personally find it to be pretty sufficient, but my opinions are not your opinions, and archery is just a lot of opinions. But what I am doing here is not so much providing a recommendation, but providing numbers for you guys to make your own decisions and decide what exactly it is that you want. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw all of my tables up here, and I'm going to let you guys look at these a little bit closer. Like I said earlier, feel free to pause to digest these a little bit better. Don't let others' opinions sway you one way or the other. Decide what you think is important, what you think works, and what you like the performance of. The biggest thing in archery is to be confident in the gear that you have. I'm just here presenting the information to you guys. But I hope you guys found this video interesting. I hope the content was digestible, and I hope you actually learned something from this video also. With that being said, make sure you guys are liking, subscribing. This video took a lot of effort, took a lot of arrows, and I hope that you guys can show your support by hitting the like button, hitting the subscribe button. And if there's something that I missed in this video that you want to hear about, or you think I could find in this data, let me know. Comment down below, and you might inspire another video that could help you, could help everyone else in the community, and could also help me. I will catch you guys on the next one. See ya.